I'm glad the president's standing up to China. I believe it is an existential threat to us militarily, economically. We need to deal with this. But if you are a U.S. consumer or business owner right now, what does it look like for the next 30, 60 days?
You know, one of the things that I think that you could dig into, if you haven't already planned to do it at a later part of the show, is today's announcement on the Consumer Price Index. Because we got an announcement on what's happening in consumer inflation that's showing that the president's economic policies are again like hitting it really out of the park. And so we had a decline in consumer prices. We had the biggest decline in drug prices that we've seen just about ever. Energy prices are way down. And so inflation is really at its best level now since really the very, very beginning of the Biden administration. I think the last time inflation was this good was the March before all of that crazy spending happened that set inflation into a disaster. And so inflation is way down because of the economic policies of the president. So the deregulation is making it easier for people to do stuff with lower costs. The fact that we've been cutting spending through DOGE, that we've made it clear with the reconciliation package, which, again, the budget instructions passed the House today, that we made it clear that we're not going to be that runaway inflation government that looks like Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden.
All right, guys, we have a special Thursday edition of the show for you. That's right. We're going to do the panel. We will do winners and losers. But before that, everybody is talking about tariffs. What do they mean? Who's affected by them? What's the strategy? How did the bond market play in? I am about to ask Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council at the White House. He's been critical in all these negotiations. And then we're going to bring the panel in and we'll break down everything else that's happening in the news this week. So without further ado, I want to bring in the White House director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Kevin Hassett, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Sean.
Okay, so just for everybody who, maybe the two people who didn't see what happened yesterday, walk us through what happened yesterday and where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really great to be back with you, Sean, and to be back here in the White House. Without you, I just miss you. We got to get you back. So I think that what happened, really not just yesterday, is that the president decided that he was going to charge tariffs on countries that were equal to either their tariffs or their non-tariff barriers, so that we would basically be treating them like they treat us. And of course, they've been mistreating American workers for a long, long time. After he made that announcement, then countries from all over the world, more than 70 countries, called us up and said, look, we got to talk. We got to talk. And up to 10 or 15 countries even made specific offers of, hey, we'll do this. We'll treat you better in the future if you reduce your tariffs. And basically, at some point, that the momentum from all the positive negotiating action that we were doing reached such a height that the day before yesterday, everybody was talking about, well, so how should we go from here to the next step so that markets understand how successful President Trump's policies are? And we were talking about, well, maybe we should close a couple of the offered deals and announce them as like early signs of how successful this approach is. Or maybe we should pause the really high tariffs because there's so many people making progress. And in the end, we decided yesterday to do the pause. And of course, that's when markets that didn't really, I think maybe hadn't priced in the fact that we're really serious about making America great again and getting the trade deals to work, that they celebrated like never before as one of the best stock market days in history because they could see that President Trump's policies were going to be a big success.
Yeah, I finally was able to look at my 401k again. I will tell you, I was searching for a meeting yesterday and I came across a quote that I thought was interesting. It said, if I was having some trouble closing a real estate deal, I would sue the guy. If he didn't give me what I wanted, a threat to sue would have no effect. But if I sued him the day before closing and then offered to withdraw the lawsuit as part of the deal, they almost always signed. They knew you meant it. Have you heard that before?
Boy, have I heard that before. Yes. That's right.
Yeah. This is what you wrote in the drift that Donald Trump had talked to you about.
He told me that you can't threaten to do something if you need to get concessions.
So was this another example of that? Was that
Oh,
him saying, "Hey, I got to go through with this so that they think I'm serious"?
yeah. I think that, but not only that, but he is serious. It's like, okay, guys, look, if you don't fix this, then here are the consequences. And people looked at the consequences, and again, the consequences were fair. The tariffs that he was supporting at the time were estimated as a best estimate of the total impact of their negative trade policies, which are hurting America. And so when they look at it, they say, well, that's a really high tariff. Well, it's just what you're doing to us. Americans didn't get mad at the president because they said, oh, we're just treating them the way they're treating us. And so he kind of won it in so many dimensions that it really is something that in the next gold-plated edition of Art of the Deal, they should add a chapter on his.
Are you convinced though that these other countries are now equally committed to getting a deal, or are they going to say, "Gosh, maybe we interpret this as him backing down," or are they like, "We got it. We need to cut a deal so that 90 days or 89 days from now, I guess, that this doesn't happen again"?
Well, I can tell you that I'm highly confident that 15 to 20 countries will have really good deals in a relatively short time. And the countries that don't have the deals after they see that are probably going to wonder, oh, geez, look at how good it is for these guys. Why am I not talking to the president? And so my guess is the sort of allies and friends and so on, we're already, I had a call with the president and the president of Switzerland already, and Japan and South Korea are fast forwarding towards us. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff that's really important that's moving forward, and even the EU, I could say.
There were some reports that the bond market really, not just reports. The president said people were getting the jitters. Explain to people what that did to the thinking and the calculus.
Well, what happened was that because the very high tariff on China went on, then there was a risk, actually somewhat realized, from bond market participants in their minds that China was going to start selling all the U.S. treasuries that they own, and that could be disruptive for markets. And so there was a moment yesterday where bond markets were sort of puzzled about how bad could it be if China starts really piling in and selling bonds, which would, of course, drive down their price and drive up the interest rate. And so you saw a spike in interest rates that was pretty large by historical standards. But then beginning at 12:45, we had a treasury auction where the new stuff that the treasury has to issue is sold. And in that treasury auction, it was a phenomenally successful auction. And a lot of people recognized that the market had sort of given them a profit opportunity by buying low or at high interest rates, but low prices. And the auction was incredibly successful. And that happened just before the close of the Twitter or the Truth Social message that said we're going to pause the tariffs. And so there were really two big positive developments as far as markets are concerned. The fact that the Treasury auction was so successful, and so that the Chinese weren't really able to disrupt the U.S. Treasury market. And second, that we then paused the tariffs. And between the two, it was off to the races in terms of how good it was in equity markets, especially.
So, Kevin, let's talk about China for a second. Obviously, that's the big isolating factor now, right? We put a lot more tariffs on them. They tariffed us back. What's the play, right? Is it we want to negotiate one-on-one with them and take down the tariff and non-tariff barriers? Like, what is it? What does that negotiation look like with China in itself?
That's something that the president is going to decide. And the president has made it clear that he has high regard for President Xi. He thinks that they work well together. And at some point, I would expect that the two of them will have a conversation about this. But as of now, there's no schedule.
That's here. You don't have to cut. My prediction is a big meeting in Beijing in July, but that's my thing.
Okay.
But what does this mean in the short term for consumers? What does this mean right now if I'm buying stuff and I'm a small business owner and I'm reliant on some kind of products from them? Listen, and just to be clear, I'm glad the president's standing up to China. I believe it is an existential threat to us militarily, economically. We need to deal with this. But if you are a U.S. consumer or business owner right now, what does it look like for the next 30, 60 days?
One of the things that I think that you could dig into, if you haven't already planned to do it at a later part of the show, is today's announcement on the Consumer Price Index. Because we got an announcement on what's happening in consumer inflation that's showing that the president's economic policies are again like hitting it like really out of the park. And so we had a decline in consumer prices. We had the biggest decline in drug prices that we've seen just about ever. Energy prices are way down. And so inflation is really at its best level now since really the very, very beginning of the Biden administration. I think the last time inflation was this good was the March before all of that crazy spending happened that set inflation into a disaster. And so inflation is way down because of the economic policies of the president. So the deregulation is making it easier for people to do stuff with lower costs. The fact that we've been cutting spending through DOGE, that we've made it clear with the reconciliation package, which, again, the budget instructions passed the House today, that we made it clear that we're not going to be that runaway inflation government that looks like Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden. We're going to be supply siders that increase the supply of stuff so prices go down. And I think that one of the things that's happening that we can see with the trade uncertainty over the last few months is that everybody is rushing to produce more stuff into the U.S. And the increase in production in the U.S. has been so striking that even with the tariffs that were put in place, some of them ahead of this report, inflation went down. Right. It's really quite remarkable.
So there's things though that what I think a lot of people say to me is, hey, I support the president. I get that he's standing up for us. We've had unfair trade practices and that China presents a threat, but there's certain things that we don't make in America. Or that, I mean, like, I'll give you an example, like potash fertilizer. Like, you can't make it here. It's made in Canada. Like, how do we adjust for supply chain issues that we do or don't make in America?
Well, the U.S. Trade Representative has an annex of things that we don't make in America or can't grow in America that are excluded from the tariffs. And so I think that we'd have to go thing by thing to see, is this a thing that qualifies as something that's not tariffed? But yes, there's a very, very long list of things that we just have to import that are excluded from the tariffs already.
All right. The only thing I wanted to cover with you is pharmaceuticals. The president went after pharmaceuticals. And again, I agree. Post-COVID, the idea that we had to look back at China for a lot of our stuff, but the reports that I read, and I'm not an expert on this, which is why I want to ask you, is a lot of medicines are generic and there's not a huge profit margin. So what's the thinking behind tariffing pharmaceuticals and how will that impact us?
Well, again, right now, pharmaceuticals are excluded from the reciprocal tariffs, and even the paused reciprocal tariffs, are at 10%, but don't apply to pharmaceuticals. And so, in the fullness of time, the president believes that we need to, for national security reasons, make sure that we have a good, solid supply of pharmaceuticals here in the U.S., so that if a foreign adversary were to decide to withhold medicines, that it wouldn't cost American lives. And so we've got a long-run policy of trying to onshore pharmaceutical production, and we've been doing it, basically through deregulatory efforts that have been attracting capital. You saw that we just had this announcement of a big new plant from Eli Lilly, but we're also considering future tariffs, and we'll, study them and make sure that they don't happen in a disruptive way. But we do need to, as a national security matter, get pharmaceutical production to happen more onshore.
All right, Kevin, last question for you. For the average American who doesn't follow the ups and downs of the market right now and says, okay, in a nutshell, just tell me, 30 seconds, what did we get this week as a country? Why are we better off than we were on Monday here now towards the end of the week?
We're way better off right now than we were on the 20th of January, all the way through. And forget about the chatter that, on the news outlets that are, way less responsible than you are, Sean. Let's look at the economic data. We've had two magnificent jobs reports. The jobs reports were incredible. 10,000 automobile jobs, a big increase in manufacturing jobs, big increase in every kind of job. The market thought there'd be about 150,000 jobs created. It was almost 230,000 in the last jobs report. And then what happens is they have this old thing called the Phillips curve, right, where it says that if you have job growth, then that causes inflation. And so while we've got this amazing job growth from President Trump's policy, we got a big reduction in inflation. So this is exactly what happens when the supply side works, right? And so we've got people going back to work, increasing the supply of labor, increasing the supply of products. We've got firms, bringing trillions of dollars of investment back into the U.S. That increases the supply of stuff. And when you increase the supply of stuff, so suppose you got an apple tree and then you get another apple tree. And so now you've got an apple farm with 2 apple trees. Well, when you go to the market, you got a lot more apples, but you're going to have to lower the price if you want to sell all the apples. And that's what's going on. We got a lot more apples and people are lowering the prices.
A lot more apples. Kevin Hassett, Director of the National Economic Council. Appreciate you being with us. And again, it was nice to have your book, The Drift, so I could get a little bit of insight into the thinking here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
What a great conversation with Kevin. Unbelievable. Those answers, I don't think I've seen anywhere else. So, this has been a huge treat for us. I want to get the panel's take on everything that's going on else in the country right now. We got a lot that happened this week outside of tariffs. Before I do that, though, I got to tell you, if you are someone who is running a business or dealing with the finances, then you know what it's like to chase everybody around looking for their receipts, their expense accounts, maybe put limits on what they can and can't spend, where they can go, what they can't do. I know what that's like because we here use Ramp for our systems. It is not just, and I've got the card right here. This is a blank one. It looks like a Visa card. It operates just like anything else. It's issued by Ramp. These are the physical ones. You get virtual ones as well so that you can enter stuff online. They do it all in like 15 minutes. You upload your information. They get you going. They got this white glove concierge service to help you integrate your entire expense software into theirs so that it all is seamless and it saves you so much time once that happens. It eliminates all that running around that, and it establishes categorization limits. I mean, trust me when I tell you that if you are the person, whether you have 5 or 5,000 employees that is responsible for this, this is going to be a game changer in your business. We had a guest, I don't know, it's going on a couple months ago now, who said when they switched their company over to Ramp, it made all of their difference. They've got over 25,000 businesses that trust Ramp, which includes companies like Spotify and the Boys and Girls Club of America. Ramp was literally rated the #1 expense counting system by Spend Management by G2. And now for a limited time, listeners and viewers of this show can get $250 in their pocket, literally $250 just by joining Ramp. So go to ramp.com/Spicer. That's ramp.com/Spicer. You will see a difference immediately in how your business runs. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. All right, guys, you know what the date on the calendar says. Tax week is next week. That's right. We all have to file our taxes, and the IRS is in full mode. Their enforcement mode is through the roof. They've got agents out there trying to make sure they get everything that they can because Washington loves to spend money and the IRS loves to get it. So if you have unfiled or back taxes that you haven't paid, I'm just going to say this. Trust me when I tell you, you never want the government coming after you. It's whether it's the DOJ or the IRS, they know what they're doing. And you need help when something like that happens, whether it's a lawyer, if the DOJ comes after you, or tax help if the folks at the IRS come after you. That's why I think the best people in the business to contact are the folks at Tax Network USA. They've got a preferred direct line in the IRS. So you're not waiting for hours on hold. They know exactly who to talk to, what agents they can deal with because they've got this preferred line, who to stay away from and how to cut deals. Over the course of their doing business, they've recovered over $1 billion for their clients, $1 billion. They know what they're doing. They know how to do it. They'll fight for you. So whether you got unpaid, unfiled taxes, do not wait. Do not let it snowball. Trust me, you can talk for free to one of their strategists. It's absolutely free to do that. They will stop the calls, the letters from the IRS. They will make sure that they advocate for you with the IRS. So call 1-800-958-1000, 1-800-958-1000, or better yet, go to tnusa.com/Sean Spicer, full name, tnusa.com/Sean Spicer. April 15th, as you guys know, is just around the corner. Don't wait. Act before the IRS does. All right. I now want to bring in our panel. Jen Pellegrino, my former colleague at Newsmax and the Senior Director of Media Affairs and the Chief Spokesperson over there at America First Policy Institute. Larry O'Connor, who is still clinging on to a title called O'Connor and Company at WMAL here in our nation's capital. Has a great, I'll say it, it's a great show on Town Hall in the middle of the day as well. And our buddy Rob Bluey, who's the president and executive editor over there at the Daily Signal. Folks, good to see you all. Another just epic week in Donald Trump's world. I can't believe it. Let me just start off with you guys on this. I know the left is freaking out and the right is saying this was art of the deal all along. Larry O'Connor, just in all honesty, like, give me a grade for this week. If you had to say, how did the Trump administration do this week? What would you grade them?
Listen, if the goal going into Liberation Day and all the tariffs and having to work around the constraints of the World Trade Organization and ultimately find a path to isolate China so you can go head to head and have the world take sides, this is an A+. You may not like the way he got there. You may be confused by how he got there. But that's where we are right now. It was always about China, Sean. And they figured out a way to sort of make the world choose which side they're going to be on. And ultimately, I think we win that fight. And now it's game on.
Jen Pellegrino, I agree with Larry. If that was the game, look, and I think my support of President Trump is well known. But I will say this, to Larry's point, if this was the strategy all along, A+, I want to isolate China. I want to bring them to the table. I believe there'll be a summit in July of this year. That's my thinking. But I don't know that that's what the week was going in. And that's where I'm a little, like, I feel like the kid who's changing the nature of the paper as the teacher's grading it. No, that was my intent all along. And I want them. I love where it ended up. I love the fact, but at the beginning of the week, this was Liberation Week to bring down tariffs. It wasn't about isolating China, because Jen Pellegrino, if I was going to isolate China, I would have said, all right, rest of the world, here's what we're doing. Join us in isolating China, and the world would have been great. I'm not sure if so. I'm probably not as good of a grader as Larry on this.
Well, listen, maybe the White House, needed to deliver a little bit more on the messaging angle of it in terms of helping the American people to understand. Listen, it's a complex topic, I think, for a lot of folks. Even if you're sitting in on calls with the White House, you're in the briefing room, there's still a lot that the American people are trying to grasp. And a lot of them are watching the legacy media, where they're seeing the hysteria, the fear mongering that's happening. And some people were buying into that. You saw the yippie folks, the panicins, as President Trump called them. There was a lot of that. But again, the folks that kind of knew that the president has a plan in place, they trusted in that. They voted for that. They stayed calm amid all of this and listened to what the White House was saying, what the Treasury Secretary was saying, seeing how these countries were coming forward. Those folks now see, obviously, what the president was going for. And as Caroline Levitt put it yesterday, this is simply the art of the deal. And so many folks didn't get that.
Rob Bluey, was it the art of the deal? Because I kind of go, I'm with Larry. If this was the intent, okay, I'm for it. I love isolating China. I believe that they are an existential threat, both militarily and economically. I'm all for it. I felt like there was a pivot. And again, I'm not trying to be critical. But I agree with Jen. Like, the messaging to me was like, I want to have your back. I'm your friend. I want to be there for you. But tell me, like, you're not making it easy for me to help you, because I was saying, yeah, Europe, bring down your tariffs. And then all of a sudden it was isolate China. I was like, help me help you.
Well, Sean, let's go back to last week. I feel like we were in a little bit of the same situation. The president had talked about reciprocal tariffs and then announced an across-the-board tariff on everybody. And so I think that the American people probably are dealing with a little bit of confusion, as you've all identified. However, I agree with Larry. The outcome here is what we ultimately wanted. Now, he went about it maybe in an unconventional way, but this president is unpredictable, and you never know really what you're going to see on a day-to-day basis. Ultimately, he is trying to fulfill those promises that he's made to the American people. I will say that I think the concerning part of all of this is that if at the end of the day, those working class Americans feel like their personal finances are getting worse as a result of what they're seeing in the stock market, or maybe higher prices at the grocery store, that's not a good thing for this administration. And that's where I'd like to see them really emphasize on a communications front some of the things that are happening. For instance, the news about inflation being down, I think a really positive sign about what the president's policies are doing. We all know that the reason that inflation went up was that Biden went on a spending spree, and you have Elon Musk and President Trump trying to bring down the cost of government. So those are important messages for them to convey alongside the tariffs. I think the other point that they should emphasize are the importance of the tax cuts and deregulation. I think that whole package is ultimately what you need to be conveying to the American people right now.
You know, Sean, a part of the reason I've reached my conclusion is because, I mean, this is awkward, but much of my opinion is informed based on watching your show. You've got a great experience, as you often reflect on, in the world of trade. You worked there in the Bush administration for our trade representatives. Isn't it true that Trump couldn't just come out and say, that's it, I'm going after China? They're part of the World Trade Organization. There are so many hoops he has to jump through to be able to do that. China can appeal. Instead, he did this emergency action across the board. China blinked. They retaliated, despite the Secretary of Treasury specifically saying, don't retaliate, don't do that. China did, and that opened the floodgates. And then Trump could say, okay, everybody else wants to make a deal. I'll pause them. Let's get what I originally wanted in the first place, China.
Oh, first of all, thank you. Secondly, you know, I don't know. I'm starting to come over to this because you're right. I mean, part of it was he was using emergency powers, so he had to make it seem like I don't know.
This is what I get for watching your show.
I know I'm evolving, but I want
educated me.
All right, so let me show you guys what Howard Lutnick, how he played.
You should watch your show now.
I will. I will going to start rewatching every day. All right, let's see Howard Lutnick and how he explained this.
Well, I think China chose the path of going against Donald Trump. I mean, he said, don't retaliate. If you retaliate, then you're going to feel my wrath. And that's what happened. They retaliated. So then Donald Trump came back, and then they went back, and Donald Trump comes back again. You know, the fact is either China's going to come to the table and make the right deal with Donald Trump, or they're not. And they are. I mean, remember, China has a $295 billion trade deficit with us, but they also go through all these other countries. They go through Vietnam. They go through Thailand. They go through Malaysia. These were all sort of like tariff runarounds where they go to Vietnam and then go to America. So, you know, if you add that all up, it's just under $1 trillion that China sells to us, more than net we sell to them. And that is just not sustainable. The president knows it. The president is calling it out. And either China comes to the table with Donald Trump or they don't. But let's be clear, we are their biggest client by far, by far, by far. The American consumer buys everything from China. They can't afford to be without us, and that's where we are today.
Jen Pellegrino, the thing to me that's interesting is I've viewed this as the world and China. Like, to let everybody else off the hook or to deal with them on a 90-day pause is one thing, but like, let's be honest, it might be all the, 169 other countries in China, but China's the big dog here. Like, if we don't solve this issue with China, it's almost like the rest of the world we could get by with dealing in a trade war, but I'm not sure that we can do this with China. And so I just wonder how this is going to play out for us, meaning we've now ratcheted up. They've come back at us. I kind of go like, these are not, when you're negotiating with and I'm not trying to be pejorative here, but I don't even know who the president of Thailand or Vietnam is. But yet, they get it. They have to cave. They have to go, okay, Donald Trump said this. Well, China, President Xi has to show strength for his people too, because he's a dictator. And if he doesn't, like, they'll be like, wait, the supreme leader is not that supreme. And I wonder how this goes. I mean, like, if you looked in your crystal ball, my prediction is we have a summit. They pause it. They say, we're doing this. We're all getting together. But I do worry, what does this mean for us for the next 30 days or so?
You know, I think China will have to cave at some point, Sean. Again, if they don't, that's going to be a problem for them, not as much for us. Now, we may feel that pain for a certain period of time, but ultimately, again, President Trump is playing the long game here. You saw the leverage that he's built in. I can't predict what China is going to do, but I can tell you President Trump is not one to back down. He said he's going to stand strong, and I think the American people trust in that. Now, as far as China, we'll see how that plays out.
Rob, to Jen's point, Yeah. I mean, I want to know you because I want your take on this, because China says, well, wait, you kind of blinked with Europe. Should we hold out for you? Because Jen's right. I think China's in a different bucket, and President Trump says I'm not going to back down. How do you think it works?
Well, there's two issues. There's the economic issues with China, which we can talk about, and then there's also the security issues with China and whether or not they want to ultimately invade Taiwan and take over the world. And so I think on the economic front, let's face it, they're not necessarily in the best economic position internally in China. So they to Jen's point, I think will probably come to the table ultimately. They can sound alarm right now, and Sean, I think you're right about Xi Jinping. I mean, he needs to project an image of leadership and strongman mentality to the Chinese people. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the status quo is sustainable. I mean, as J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have talked about throughout the campaign and throughout the early days of their presidency, we can't continue down this path where we continue to rely on China and let China take advantage of us and other countries across the world. It's time to stand up to them and say enough is enough. And frankly, Trump started to do that during the first term, and we need him to be aggressive now. When it comes to the national security issues, I don't think we can take our eye off of that either. We need to have this pivot to Asia and make sure that we're focused on that region. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to get peace deals in the Middle East and Europe, so that we can make sure that our military resources are prepared in the event that China does act.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about this week, and maybe this is just total inside baseball, but I felt like we finally saw certain key principals and staffers exert themselves, right? It wasn't like there hasn't been that moment yet. And so you had Stephen Miller, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who we just played, the Commerce Secretary, Peter Navarro, Kevin Hassett, and there's some others. Who stood out to you guys as the player of the week?
I mean, we're already projecting ahead to my winner of the week, so I'll let you know. It's so obvious here because the 1C average grade they should get is the messaging, as Jen pointed out. You had some people emerge here, Sean, saying, oh, this is going to bring American manufacturing back because that's the only way to avoid the tariffs. And at the same time, you had another person saying, we're going to make so much on tariffs, it's going to pay down the deficit and we can replace the income tax. And then you had other people saying, don't worry, it's just a threat. It's a weapon to get the other tariffs to go away. And it's all, you cannot literally have all of those things happen at the same time. One voice stood above everyone else. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He was the lighthouse in the fog. He had his hand on the rudder. He spoke and everybody stopped and felt better about everything. And it was clear that he emerged as the winner this week.
Larry, let me just challenge you though. I do think that as Caroline Levitt said, having this radical transparency and the debate between Elon Musk and Peter Navarro was in some ways, I think, refreshing. I understand what your point is about not consistent messaging. At the same time, I do think that the American people value seeing this debate play out. And maybe it's just for those of us inside the Beltway that enjoy it so much. But it's so different from what we've seen from other administrations in the past that on the one hand, I actually like the fact that they were having a policy debate out in front of the American people so that for once we could see what their thinking was.
Yeah, there's something to the team of rivals deal, I suppose.
It's good to see that transparency. Of course, the left wants to jump on that and say that there's division among the administration and people in Trump world. Of course, they're going to do that. They've been planning to. But again, I really agree with you, Larry. I think Treasury Secretary Bessent has done an excellent job on the messaging. He's done a lot of media. He was out there telling us how many countries had come to the negotiating table and really breaking this down into something that the American people could digest and feel a little bit of more of a sense of calm and peace and understanding of what the president's vision has been.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Rob, I agree with you. First of all, I do appreciate the fact that Larry's making it very clear that he lives in Annapolis with all of his nautical references, hand on the rudder. I mean, I get it. That's nice. But I will say that I think the military, like, to me, number one, I have said this over and over again, and it bears repeating, that China presents an existential threat to us. They want to not just militarily, but economically crush us and take over the world. And if people don't get that, which is why I'm so passionate about getting rid of TikTok and everything else, because if we can't do the easy, we can't do the hard. That being said, I also be a little defensive of the comms department here, because the messaging is tough when you're saying one thing and then you got 5 principals going out. And so it's like they get sometimes the finger pointed at them when it's like, wait a second, we didn't say that, they did. And it was interesting. I agree with you, Larry, that I think Scott Bessent, and this is why it's important as a guy, to your point, I was the assistant U.S. trade rep. Like, you would always have fights with, who could stay in their lane. This isn't Bessent's lane. Like, the Treasury Department is not responsible for tariffs. And the idea that he rose above this to become such a trusted voice, I think speaks volumes of where he is in his stature as we head towards a tax bill where you're going to need somebody like that. He kind of proved himself, and he's not, I mean, I think we can all agree, although I'll let you guys tell me, like, he's not the biggest, like wordsmith kind of, but he comes across as an authentic, honest broker. And I think more than anything, that's what people want.
Yeah, I agree. And if I'm Jason Smith, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm trying to figure out how to get this tax bill through, shepherd it through a very tight vote in the House, I'm letting Besson do a lot of that work with me and for me, even because he's got the power right now. I think he's got the messaging.
All right. Well, speaking of tax cuts, there was a clip that came out this week of one of the Democrats. Kind of as they were starting to talk about the tax bill and the reconciliation. I want to play this for you because it blew my mind. Take a look at how a Democrat views some of these tax cuts.
The Speaker is rushing to the floor to pass a budget reconciliation to screw America by passing the biggest tax cut in history on the backs of the American people? WTF? Who's in charge?
By the way, that was Jason Smith Jamieson Smith, the U.S. I mean, sorry. You got that was Jamieson Greer was testifying in front of the House Ways and Means Committee, and that was Stephen Hosford, a Democrat from Nevada. The thing that I thought was interesting, Jen Pellegrino, is this guy is the biggest tax cut. WTF? Who's in charge and whatever? And I'm like, it was so funny because we played the whole clip. Jamieson Greer goes, "The president." It was a great moment, but I'll go back to the bigger problem here. If you think the biggest tax cuts is a horrible thing for America and it will screw America, to quote him, I'm like, that's what you think is screwing America, giving Americans back their money?
Yeah, isn't that something, Sean? You know, I thought Democrats always tried to position themselves as the party of the working class, but we've seen anything but in recent years, whether it's from this congressman on the Hill, whether it's AOC flying in first class and being a total hypocrite, which we might talk about later. But there's so many signs of that. And it's really unfortunate because these tax cuts, the Trump administration said this week, if these don't go through and continue on, the American taxpayer, the average taxpayer is looking at a 22% tax hike. There's going to be a lot of pain for people if this doesn't go through. So obviously pushing back on that, on the tariffs and so forth. The Democrats aren't looking out for the average man.
Yeah, and two points, Sean, to follow up on Jen. Number one, the Heartland Institute is out with a new study, which we covered at the Daily Signal this week, that the tax cuts do benefit the everyday American, the working class American, not proportionally the rich, as you're going to hear Democrats say repeatedly during this debate. They've said it for the last 8 years, I feel. They're going to continue to say that. Tell them it's a lie and make sure that the American people know the truth about who the tax cuts really do benefit. It's everybody. And then secondly, to this point about the Democrats and their ties with Wall Street, just follow the money. I mean, that is where the Democrats are getting bankrolled from, these big Wall Street firms. There's been a complete transformation in our lifetime in terms of how the Republican Party used to be the party of Wall Street. Now that we're the party of Main Street. And the Democrats have shifted in the other direction. They are not looking out for the working class American. It is Donald Trump and J.D. Vance who are doing that.
Yeah, by the way, every Republican strategist seeing a congressman screaming about how angry he is that Republicans are passing the biggest tax cut in history. It's just gold. It's just so beautiful.
I forgot to mention in my list of staffers, I think J.D. Vance may not have gotten a ton of the spotlight this week, but he deserves a lot of the credit, because he, behind the scenes, I think was very influential. But I also want to talk about another thing that, you guys mentioned things that weren't, I may add a new segment on the show going forward, because with everything that happens in Trump world, I think there's a lot of news that doesn't get covered. And it's like, there's a lot of big things. And one of them happened earlier this week in the Oval Office on shipbuilding. And I want to play you guys the clip because I think it's important to understand where we are in this country. Take a look at the president talking about this.
Shipbuilding, okay? A little off page on the market and tariffs, but we don't build ships in America anymore. In 2022, we built 5 ships.
5.
China built 1,800 ships in 2022, right? So if you want to be a global power, you have to build ships and you have to have sailors to sail those ships. And so the president today said, you know what? We are going to actually build ships in America again, and we're going to train the mariners to sail those ships. So DOT has a huge component of that. We're excited. But this president, he thinks long-term and strategically and understands that if there's a crisis in the world that involves our military, we need ships to support the military on the commerce side, and we don't make them anymore. So again, that was great.
All right. That was actually Sean Duffy, the Transportation Secretary, speaking, Rob, after that. But I think the bigger issue is there's a prioritization of how big our fleet is, what we're doing, and it doesn't seem like we're building stuff anymore. And that's one thing that, while we can talk a lot about the private sector, that the government can be funding.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to make sure that we're bringing some of those jobs back to the United States. And I think that, as you've heard Howard Lutnick and other people talk about this reindustrialization process, I mean, it is a long-term process. I think J.D. Vance said 25 years at a Heritage Foundation event last week. So it's not going to happen overnight. We need to recognize that there's a process for building these factories again. There's a process for training workers. But unless Donald Trump starts that now, we will never begin that process. And as somebody who came from a family that worked in manufacturing in upstate New York, I can tell you, those are the types of jobs that this next generation is going to need, particularly if we're going to be a leader. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the types of jobs that we were doing last century. Let's think about it in the positioning of AI and all of the future technologies and take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, Rob, fellow upstate New York native here, and I can tell you, I've seen how the northern part of the state has really been devastated as a result of a lot of factories closing over the last several decades. We want to bring a lot of that manufacturing back home, and you look again at this week, the work President Trump did with the coal industry and benefiting coal workers, deregulations there. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure these jobs are brought back home, and again, that's going to take time, but these are steps in the right direction.
Yeah, about those Chinese naval ships, I think, Sean, you're pretty plugged in with the United States Navy as well. Most experts in the Navy see those ships as not a huge threat. Numbers-wise, yes, but it's not the best tech. But it is time for the U.S. Navy to resurge right now. You mentioned my connections with Annapolis. It's something that's openly...
You live there. That's not a connection. You just live there. Come on.
My daughter went there, and I have many adopted sponsored children who are officers in the Navy now.
Mr. Rhode Island picking on Mr. Annapolis over here. Okay, pot and kettle.
Oh, Newport to Annapolis any day of the week.
To be fair, Sean literally does have a pretty direct connection to the Naval Academy. But that said, there's also a hidden political thing going on here, Sean, that I'm pretty sure you can pick up on. When the president signs an executive order to empower more shipbuilding, there are a couple of strategically placed states and senators who benefit from that, right? And those are votes that he needs in the Senate, votes that aren't always there. Specifically, a certain senator in Maine who's all over building
Bath
ships.
Shipworks happens to be in Maine. Isn't that coincidental?
Senator Collins, not always the most reliable vote, but
happens to be in cycle for re-election. Yeah. Oh, wow. Coincidence. But here's a bigger question that I wanted to pose to you guys. I get it. Like, I'm a fan of more ships, but also let's face the reality of what the fight will look like in 2027 or after. I don't know that big deck ships out in the 7th Fleet are necessarily where we want to be having the fight. I think drones, small boats. I mean, like the question is, are we solving yesterday's problem, or are we looking ahead enough? And that's the thing that I think. I know the Heritage Foundation, Rob, is constantly looking at this, but I'm happy that we're getting manufacturing and shipbuilding and our industrial base back. But I'm like, are we a decade too late?
Yeah, and I'd point you to that index of military strength that Heritage puts out, because, I mean, it identifies exactly where the shortcomings are. And unfortunately, after 8 years of Barack Obama and 4 years of Joe Biden, there just hasn't been the investment in the military. I think this is one of the reasons why probably not only are the troops excited about Pete Hegseth leaving the Department of Defense, but those of us who are in the policy world are also excited, because he is thinking about the future. And I think J.D. Vance is thinking about the future. And so I'm sure shipbuilding is a component of that. But you're absolutely right, Sean, that there needs to be a focus on where warfare is going in the future, so that the United States is prepared to confront not only hostile actors like China, which is obviously going to be using technology to their advantage and our disadvantage, but also, other players like the Houthis, who are disrupting shipping lanes in the Middle East. And so you need to be prepared on a multi-front war.
Yeah, but guys, I mean, the Houthi operation, that was a naval operation. You look at, just like the tariff issue, this is about China. If Taiwan is under threat, that will be a Navy and Marine Corps operation. Yes, we're going to have drones. Where are we going to launch those drones from? We're going to launch them from ships. This is very much an issue of matching China ship for ship, boat for boat. And don't forget those boats. Those submarines are a big part of this as well.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, and again, part of this is thinking smartly because you need somewhere to launch them from. But the reality is they're also setting targets. Part of the reason the Houthis that we're paying attention to this group is because they can come at, I think it's the USS Carney, and basically send a bunch of drones and attack the U.S. Navy. I mean, the idea that the United States Navy is having to deal with basically a mosquito is because they have nimbleness in the ability to use drones and other things that it's not like they're coming at them with big ships. And that's a problem.
Yeah, but they didn't leave a mark. I mean, it's true. The Gettysburg and the Stockdale, I think, were the two that were in the closest line of fire on a regular basis for the last year, which is a real underreported story. But they never really did anything. And then it was time to finally hit back, and Trump gave the okay. I think they talked about that during a Signal chat. And that was the Navy launch. That's what ended up happening. And the Houthis, they're pretty quiet right now.
All right, guys, we had to cut it short with the panel today because we brought in Kevin Hassett to give us this explanation of what's going on. But don't worry, we're going to tape winners and losers. We'll put it on my YouTube channel. So if you want to find out who the winners and the losers were, go to my YouTube. I'll pop it up over the weekend. You'll still be able to see that. Thanks for being with us and ending your week. Tomorrow, by the way, we are bringing on the authors of that brand new book, Fight. They are literally looking into the decline of President Biden and Kamala Harris's campaign. I'm telling you, I got an early copy of this. You are not going to want to miss this interview tomorrow with the two authors. Lots of breaking news, lots of insights into the book. That's tomorrow on the show. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for tuning into the Sean Spicer Show. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.